Dr. Catherine Adams stared at the screen in front of her with wide eyes. The numbers dancing across the monitor made no sense according to everything she knew about physics. She rubbed her tired eyes and looked again, but the readings remained the same. Something impossible was happening in the quantum chamber behind the thick glass wall. The Henderson Research Facility sat in the middle of the Nevada desert, far from curious eyes and prying reporters. Catherine had been working here for 5 years, trying to understand the mysteries of dark energy. Her team consisted of only 3 other scientists, and their budget was small compared to the massive projects in other countries. But sometimes, the best discoveries came from the smallest labs. Kevin Mitchell, her lead engineer, walked into the control room carrying a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. His hair was messy from running his hands through it, a habit he had when confused. He looked at Catherine's pale face and knew something was wrong. "What is it?" Kevin asked, setting down his coffee cup. Catherine pointed at the screen without, taking her eyes off it. "The exotic matter sample is doing something we've never seen before. Look at these energy readings." Kevin leaned over her shoulder and studied the data. His eyes grew wide as he understood what he was seeing. The small piece of exotic matter they had been testing was somehow bending space around itself. Not just a little bit, but in ways that should have required the energy output of a small star. "That's impossible," Kevin whispered. "The energy input is barely enough to power a light bulb, but the space distortion readings are off the charts." Catherine nodded slowly. "I know it's impossible, but it's happening right in front of us." The 2 scientists stood in silence for several minutes, watching the impossible unfold before their eyes. The exotic matter, no bigger than a grain of sand, was creating a bubble in space-time that pulsed and shifted like a living thing. According to their instruments, anything inside that bubble would experience time and space differently than the rest of the universe. "Catherine," Kevin said quietly, "I think we just figured out how to build a faster-than-light drive." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. For decades, humanity had been trapped in their solar system, watching the stars but unable to reach them. The Galactic Council, a group of alien species that controlled most of the known galaxy, had kept humans locked away like prisoners. They controlled all the technology that allowed travel between star systems, and they made sure humans stayed exactly where they were. Catherine picked up her phone with shaking hands. She knew she had to call someone. But who? This discovery would change everything. The Council had always said that faster-than-light travel was impossible without their special gates and exotic technology. They claimed that only the most advanced species could understand such complex science, but here in a small lab in Nevada, 2 human scientists had stumbled onto something that might prove them wrong. "We need to call Admiral Hayes," Catherine said finally. "She needs to know about this before anyone else." Admiral Patricia Hayes had been in charge of Earth's space defense for 10 years. She was tough, smart, and one of the few people in the military who truly understood what humanity was up against. The Council allowed humans to have small ships that could travel around their solar system, but nothing that could go to other stars. It was like being allowed to walk around your house but never step outside. Within 2 hours, Admiral Hayes was standing in the lab, staring at the same impossible readings that had shocked Catherine and Kevin. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had spent her career preparing for the day when humanity might have to fight for their freedom, but she had never imagined it might come like this. "How sure are you?" the Admiral asked. "Completely sure," Catherine replied. "We've run the test 17 times. The results are always the same. This exotic matter is creating a stable space-time distortion with minimal energy input." Admiral Hayes was quiet for a long time, thinking about what this meant. The Council had treaties with Earth that strictly forbade humans from developing faster-than-light technology. They claimed it was for everyone's safety, to prevent dangerous accidents that could damage space itself. But everyone knew the real reason. The Council stayed in power by controlling who could travel between the stars. "Can you make it bigger?" the Admiral asked finally. Kevin nodded. "We think so. The effect scales up with the amount of exotic matter we use. In theory, we could create a bubble large enough to contain a spacecraft." "How long would it take?" "Give us 6 months and proper funding," Catherine said. "We could have a working prototype." Admiral Hayes looked at the two scientists for a long moment. She knew that what they were asking her to approve would change everything. If the Council found out what they were doing, Earth would face consequences that could mean the end of human civilization. But if they succeeded, humanity might finally be free to explore the galaxy on their own terms. "You have whatever you need," the Admiral said. "But this project is now classified at the highest level. No one else can know what you're working on." As the Admiral left the lab, Catherine and Kevin looked at each other with a mixture of excitement and fear. They had just taken the first step toward either humanity's greatest triumph or its final disaster. Captain Ryan Clark stood on the bridge of the UES Pioneer, watching the final preparations for humanity's most important test. 6 months had passed since Catherine Adams and Kevin Mitchell had made their incredible discovery. Now their theory was about to become reality in the form of the ship that surrounded him. The Pioneer was not impressive to look at. It had started life as a simple research vessel, the kind used to study asteroids and collect space dust. But hidden inside its ordinary hull was the most advanced technology humanity had ever created. Catherine's faster-than-light drive sat in the ship's engine room like a mechanical heart, waiting to pulse with the power to bend space itself. Ryan had volunteered for this mission, knowing he might never come home. The drive had worked perfectly in laboratory tests, but no one knew what would happen when they tried to move an entire spaceship faster than light. The math said it should work, but math had been wrong before. If something went bad, the Pioneer and everyone on it might simply vanish from existence. "All systems ready, Captain," reported Lieutenant Danny Foster from the navigation station. Danny was young and eager, fresh out of the Space Academy. He had volunteered for the mission the moment he heard about it, despite knowing the risks. Like everyone else on the crew, he believed that humanity deserved to walk among the stars. Dr. Lisa Parker monitored the drive systems from her station near the back of the bridge. She had worked closely with Catherine to understand every detail of how the exotic matter created its impossible effects. Lisa's job was to watch for any sign that the drive was about to malfunction and shut it down before it could destroy the ship. "Drive systems are stable," Lisa reported. "Exotic matter containment is holding steady. We're ready when you are, Captain." Ryan took a deep breath and opened a communication channel to Earth. Admiral Hayes was waiting in the command center at Henderson, along with Catherine, Kevin, and a dozen other scientists and military officers. This moment had been planned and rehearsed for months, but everyone knew that plans often meant nothing when faced with the unknown. "Earth Control, this is Pioneer. We are ready to begin the test. Pioneer, this is Admiral Hayes. You are cleared for FTL activation. Good luck." Ryan looked around at his crew. There were only 12 people on board, all volunteers who had families and friends waiting for them back on Earth. Each of them knew they were about to make history, one way or another. "Lisa, begin the activation sequence, starting exotic matter. Resonance," Lisa announced. "Field generation in 10 seconds. The bridge lights dimmed as power flowed to the drive systems. Through the ship's hull, Ryan could feel a strange vibration, like the universe itself was humming. The view screen showed the stars outside, steady and unchanging, but the instruments told a different story. Space around the Pioneer was beginning to bend and twist in ways that hurt the mind to think about. "Field established," Lisa called out. "Space-time distortion is stable. We're ready for translation." Ryan gripped the arms of his command chair. "Engage!" The universe exploded into light and darkness at the same time. Ryan felt like he was falling and flying simultaneously, as if his body couldn't decide which direction was up. The stars outside the view screen stretched into long lines of light, then collapsed back into points, then did something that his eyes couldn't follow and his brain refused to understand. Then everything was still. "Report," Ryan said, surprised, to hear his own voice sounding normal. "Translation complete," Danny announced, his voice filled with wonder. "We're at Proxima Centauri. Travel time was 3 minutes and 14 seconds. The bridge erupted in cheers and shouts of celebration. What should have taken years using Council technology had been accomplished in less time than it took to eat lunch. The impossible had become reality, and humanity had just taken its first step beyond the solar system. But their celebration was cut short by an alarm from the communications station. Lieutenant Sarah Brooks, the ship's communications officer, looked up from her console with fear in her eyes. "Captain, I'm detecting multiple ships approaching our position. They're big, and they're not broadcasting any friendly signals. On the view screen, shapes began to appear out of the darkness between stars. Sleek, angular vessels that moved with predatory grace toward the small human ship. Ryan had seen pictures of Council enforcer ships in intelligence briefings, but seeing them in person was different. They were beautiful in the way that sharks were beautiful, perfectly designed for their deadly purpose. "This is Enforcer Commander Zexhai of the Council Fleet," came a voice over the communication system. The words were translated by computer, but the tone needed no translation. It was the voice of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Human vessel, you have violated the Treaty of Solar Confinement. Surrender immediately or be destroyed." Ryan felt his heart pounding in his chest. The test had worked perfectly, but now they faced the consequences of their success. The Council had been watching, and they were not pleased. "Lisa, can we get home?" Ryan asked quietly. "Yes, Captain. The drive is ready for another jump." "Then let's go home and tell them what we found." The Pioneer vanished in another flash of impossible light, leaving the Council ships floating alone in the darkness. But the damage was done. Humanity had proven they could travel between the stars without Council permission or technology. The age of human confinement was over, and everyone in the galaxy would soon know it. Back on Earth, Admiral Hayes watched the Pioneer reappear in Earth orbit with a mixture of pride and dread. The test had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes, but success brought its own dangers. The Council would not ignore this challenge to their authority. Humanity had just declared its independence from galactic law, and there would be consequences. The real test was just beginning. High Arbiter Veltar stood in the command chamber of his flagship, watching the tactical display with growing anger. The crystalline being had ruled the Council for over 2 centuries, and in all that time, no species had dared to openly violate the fundamental laws that kept the galaxy in order. But these humans, these primitive creatures who had barely learned to leave their home planet, had somehow developed technology that threatened everything the Council had built. The massive Council, fleet hung in space at the edge of Earth's solar system like a dark cloud of judgment. Over 3,000 ships had been assembled in just days, pulled from patrol duties across the galaxy. Dreadnoughts the size of small cities floated alongside sleek destroyer squadrons and massive carrier vessels bristling with fighter craft. It was enough firepower to crack a planet in half, and everyone in the solar system knew it. "The humans refused to respond to our demands," reported Sub-Commander Keithvar, an insectoid being whose chittering voice conveyed frustration. "They acknowledge our transmissions but offer no surrender terms." Veltar's crystalline form pulsed with deep red light, a sign of extreme displeasure among his species. For 10,000 years, the Council had maintained peace and order throughout the galaxy by ensuring that only they possessed the technology for faster-than-light travel. When species wanted to trade or communicate across star systems, they had to use Council gates and pay Council fees. When they wanted to colonize new worlds, they needed Council permission and Council transport. It was a system that had prevented wars and brought prosperity to countless worlds. But it also meant that the Council controlled everything. They decided which species could advance and which must remain primitive. They chose who could explore new regions of space and who must stay where they were. Some called it tyranny, but Veltar preferred to think of it as necessary order. Without the Council's firm guidance, the galaxy would descend into chaos and war. Now the humans had changed everything with their impossible discovery. If other species learned that faster-than-light travel was possible without Council technology, the entire galactic order would collapse. Rebellions would spread like fire across the stars. Ancient enemies would wage war without Council oversight. The peace that had lasted for millennia would shatter into 1,000 fragments. "Send the final ultimatum," Veltar commanded. They have 24 Earth hours to surrender the technology and submit to Council justice. If they refuse, we will demonstrate why the Council's authority must never be questioned. On Earth, President Susan Grant sat in the Emergency Command Center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. Around her, military advisors and government officials watched the displays showing the massive alien fleet positioned just beyond Pluto's orbit. The numbers were sobering. Earth's entire space defense force consisted of fewer than 200 ships, most of them small patrol craft designed for asteroid mining and orbital security. Against the Council's overwhelming firepower, they might as well have been throwing rocks at a hurricane. Admiral Hayes stood beside the president, her face grim but determined. "The ultimatum just came in. We have 24 hours to surrender the FTL drive technology and submit our scientists for Council punishment. If we refuse, they'll attack." President Grant looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. Some showed fear, others anger, but all of them understood what this moment meant. For decades, humans had lived under Council restrictions, accepting their role as a junior species in galactic civilization. They had been told they were too young, too primitive, too dangerous to be trusted with advanced technology. Now they had the chance to prove otherwise, but the price of failure would be extinction. "What do our allies say?" the president asked. "We don't have any," Admiral Hayes replied bluntly. "Every species in the galaxy depends on the Council for interstellar trade and communication. They can't afford to support us, even if they wanted to." Dr. Catherine Adams spoke up from her position at the science station. "The drive technology is already spreading. We've transmitted the basic principles to research facilities around the world. Even if they destroy Earth, the knowledge will survive." "That won't help us if we're all dead," muttered General Frank Collins, the head of planetary defense. President Grant stood up slowly. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, but in this moment she carried the weight of humanity's future on her shoulders. Everyone in the room knew that her next words would determine whether their species lived free or died in chains. "We didn't spend centuries dreaming of the stars just to give up when we finally found a way to reach them," she said quietly. "Send our response to the Council." The message that went out to the Council fleet was simple and direct. "Humanity rejects your ultimatum. We will not surrender our freedom or our future to maintain your tyranny. If you want to stop us from exploring the galaxy, you'll have to destroy us first." Veltar received the human response with something approaching respect. These creatures were brave, he had to admit, even if they were being foolish. Their defiance would cost them everything, but at least they would die with dignity. "Begin the bombardment," he ordered. "Target their military installations first. Perhaps when they see their defenses crumbling, they will reconsider their position." But even as the Council ships moved into attack formation, other events were unfolding that would change everything. Captain Ryan Clark and the Pioneer had not been idle during the weeks since their first successful test. Working in secret, they had been making contact with other species throughout the galaxy, carrying a message that would shake the foundations of Council power. The message was simple but revolutionary. Faster-than-light travel was possible without Council technology. The knowledge was available to anyone who wanted it. The chains that had bound the galaxy for 10,000 years could be broken if enough beings had the courage to act. On a water world in the Vega system, the aquatic Merthani received the human transmission with growing excitement. For 3 centuries, they had been forced to serve as laborers for the Council, their entire species trapped on their homeworld while others explored the stars. But now they had hope. In the asteroid fields near Wolf 359, the silicon-based Xerion Collective processed the information with their hive mind intelligence. They had been mining radioactive materials for Council ships for 500 years, slowly poisoning their own people in service to their masters. The humans offered them a chance for freedom. Throughout the galaxy, oppressed species began to dream of liberation. The Council had ruled through fear and dependency for so long that they had forgotten the power of hope. But hope was exactly what humanity had given to the galaxy, and once released, it could not be contained. As the Council fleet prepared to destroy Earth, they had no idea that their empire was already beginning to crumble from within. Captain Ryan Clark watched the data stream flowing across his command screen as the Pioneer hung in the shadow of a dead moon in the Arcturus system. His small ship had become something he never expected when this mission began. He was no longer just a test pilot proving that human technology could work. He had become a messenger of revolution, carrying hope to species that had forgotten what freedom looked like. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of desperate jumps across the galaxy. While the Council fleet blockaded Earth, the Pioneer had been visiting system after system, broadcasting the technical specifications for Catherine's faster-than-light drive to anyone willing to listen. Each transmission was like dropping a lit match into dry grass. The fire of rebellion was spreading faster than even Ryan had dared to hope. Lieutenant Danny Foster looked up from his navigation console with excitement in his young eyes. "Captain, we're receiving confirmation signals from 17 different star systems. They've successfully built prototype drives based on our data." Ryan felt a surge of pride mixed with worry. Every species that built their own FTL drive was one step closer to freedom, but it also meant one more target for Council retaliation. The crystalline rulers of the galaxy were not known for their mercy when dealing with rebels. Dr. Lisa Parker had been monitoring Council communications since they began their mission. Her face was pale as she turned from her station. "Captain, I'm picking up reports of Council enforcer fleets moving towards several systems where we transmitted the drive data. It looks like they're planning to make examples of the early adopters." The ugly reality of their situation settled over the bridge like a dark cloud. Giving other species the tools of freedom was one thing, but protecting them from Council vengeance was another matter entirely. The Pioneer was just one small ship, and the Council had thousands of warships spread across the galaxy. "Any word from Earth?" Ryan asked. Communications Officer Sarah Brooks shook her head grimly. "Nothing for the past 6 hours. The Council jamming is getting stronger. For all we know, the attack on Earth has already begun." Ryan stared out at the stars through the main view screen. Somewhere out there, his home world was fighting for its survival against impossible odds. His family, his friends, everyone he had ever known was facing the full wrath of the most powerful military force in the galaxy, and here he was, light years away, trying to convince alien species to risk their own destruction for the chance at freedom. A new signal appeared on the communication board, strong and clear despite the Council jamming. Sarah's eyes widened as she processed the incoming data. "Captain, it's from the Kepler 442 system. The Merthani are requesting immediate assistance." Ryan knew about the Merthani from the intelligence briefings he had studied before the mission. They were an aquatic species that had been enslaved by the Council for over 3 centuries. Their homeworld was a beautiful ocean planet that the Council used as a vacation resort for their elite. The Merthani themselves were forced to work as servants and entertainers, their advanced underwater cities converted into luxury hotels for Council tourists. "What kind of assistance?" Ryan asked. They say they've built 20 FTL-capable ships, but they're untested. A Council enforcer fleet is moving toward their system and will arrive in less than 18 hours. They're asking for help with evacuation procedures. Ryan looked around at his crew. They had signed up to test experimental technology and maybe make first contact with alien species. None of them had expected to become leaders of a galactic rebellion. But sometimes history chose ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Set course for Kepler 442, Ryan ordered. Maximum speed. The journey to the Merthani homeworld took 14 hours, even with the Pioneer's advanced drive running at full power. When they dropped out of FTL near the ocean planet, Ryan was amazed by what he saw. The Merthani had not built ordinary spacecraft. Their ships were living creatures, massive biomechanical whales that swam through space as easily as they moved, through water. Each one was over a kilometer long, with hulls that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns and propulsion systems that defied human understanding. Admiral Kethara of the Merthani fleet contacted the Pioneer as soon as they arrived. Her translated voice carried the sound of rushing water and distant whale songs. Human vessel, we are grateful for your arrival. Our people have worked without rest to prepare for evacuation, but we fear our ships are not ready for extended space travel. What can we do to help? Ryan asked. Our bioships require careful calibration of their FTL organs. Your people understand the mathematics of faster-than-light travel better than we do. Can you assist our engineers? Dr. Lisa Parker was already pulling up the technical data they had transmitted to the Merthani. Captain, their approach is completely different from ours. They're using biological processes to manipulate space-time instead of exotic matter. It's brilliant, but incredibly complex. Over the next few hours, human and Merthani engineers worked together to fine-tune the bioship's FTL capabilities. It was like nothing any of them had experienced before. The Merthani ships were not just vessels, they were living beings with their own thoughts and feelings. Each one had to be convinced to carry refugees instead of fighting to defend their homeworld. As they worked, more reports came in from across the galaxy. The Silicon-based Xerian collective had launched their own ships and simply vanished from their assigned mining stations, leaving behind automated messages that declared their freedom from Council rule. The plant-like beings of the Vegan Confederacy had coordinated the largest mass exodus in galactic history, with entire continents of their people boarding bioships and jumping to unexplored regions of space. But the Council's response was swift and brutal. On worlds where the rebellions were still organizing, enforcer fleets arrived with orders to make examples. Entire cities were turned to glass by orbital bombardment. Industrial centers that had begun producing FTL drives were reduced to radioactive craters. The message was clear: defy the Council and face extinction. Just as the last Merthani bioship completed its calibration, the Council enforcer fleet arrived at the edge of the system. 12 massive dreadnoughts accompanied by dozens of smaller warships, all bristling with weapons that could sterilize a planet. Their commander, a reptilian being called Sekthara, transmitted a simple message to the ocean world below. Surrender all FTL-capable vessels and submit to Council judgment. You have 1 hour to comply before we begin planetary bombardment. Admiral Kethara's response came immediately. We reject your demands. The Merthani people choose freedom over slavery. The bioships began to move, their massive forms accelerating toward the edge of the system with impossible grace. The Pioneer stayed close to the lead vessel, ready to provide technical support if any of the FTL systems failed. As the first Council warships moved to intercept them, something unexpected happened. The bioships didn't flee. Instead, they turned to face their pursuers and opened fire with weapons that no one had known they possessed. Beams of coherent water struck the Council vessels with devastating force, while living torpedoes swam through space to detonate against enemy hulls. The Merthani had been preparing for this moment for 3 centuries, building weapons in secret while pretending to be helpless servants. The battle was fierce, but brief. The Council ships were powerful, but they had not expected serious resistance from what they considered an enslaved species. When 5 of their dreadnoughts were destroyed in the first exchange of fire, the remaining enforcers retreated to a safe distance and called for reinforcements. Admiral Kethara contacted Ryan as the bioships prepared to jump to safety. "Human Captain, your people have given us something more precious than freedom. You have given us hope. We will not forget this gift." As the Murthani fleet vanished into FTL, carrying 3 billion refugees to a new life among the stars, Ryan realized that the galaxy would never be the same. The rebellion had moved beyond simply stealing Council technology. Entire species were discovering their own ways to break free from 10,000 years of oppression. The Council might still have the largest fleet in the galaxy, but they were no longer fighting a few rebels with stolen technology. They were facing a revolution that spanned hundreds of worlds and dozens of species, each with their own reasons to hate their former masters. The age of Council dominance was ending, and nothing could stop what came next. Admiral Patricia Hayes stood in the command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching the tactical display with growing amazement. What had started as humanity's desperate gamble for freedom had become something far greater than anyone had imagined. The display showed the positions of rebel fleets across the galaxy, each represented by a different colored dot. 3 weeks ago, there had been only one dot representing the Pioneer. Now there were hundreds. "Ma'am, we're receiving another status report from Captain Clark," reported Commander Jake Sullivan, the liaison between Earth's defense forces and the rebel fleet. The Murthani evacuation was successful. All 3 billion refugees are now safely in the Sagittarius Arm, establishing new colonies beyond Council reach. Hayes nodded, but her attention was focused on the growing crisis closer to home. The Council fleet blockading Earth had grown to over 5,000 ships, making it the largest military force ever assembled in human space. But they seemed hesitant to attack, and Hayes was beginning to understand why. Dr. Catherine Adams looked up from her workstation where she had been analyzing intelligence reports from across the galaxy. "Admiral, the pattern is becoming clear. Every time the Council destroys a rebel world, 3 more species join the uprising. Their brutality is working against them." The irony was not lost on Hayes. For 10,000 years, the Council had maintained order through fear and overwhelming force. Species obeyed because they knew that resistance meant extinction. But humanity's gift of FTL technology had changed the fundamental equation. Now species that rebelled could simply leave, taking their entire populations to unexplored regions of space where the Council couldn't follow. President Susan Grant entered the command center with a grim expression. She had just finished a secure communication with the leaders of Earth's remaining allies, and the news was not encouraging. "The lunar colonies are requesting permission to evacuate," she announced. "They don't think our defenses can hold against a full Council assault." Hayes understood their fear. Earth's moon-based cities were exposed and vulnerable, easy targets for Council bombardment. But evacuation would mean abandoning the industrial centers that produced humanity's small fleet of defense ships. Without those facilities, Earth would be completely defenseless. "How long would it take to evacuate Luna?" Hayes asked. 48 hours for essential personnel," replied General Frank Collins. "A week for everyone." "We don't have a week," Hayes said grimly. "Intelligence suggests the Council will attack within the next 24 hours. The debate that followed was interrupted by an urgent communication from the long-range sensor stations on Pluto. The duty officer's voice was tight with excitement as he made his report. "Admiral, we're detecting massive FTL signatures throughout the outer system. Multiple fleets are arriving simultaneously." Hayes felt her heart skip a beat. If the Council was bringing in reinforcements, the battle for Earth was about to become a slaughter. But as the sensor data came in, she realized something was very different about these new arrivals. "Ma'am," the sensor operator continued, "the new ships aren't Council design. We're seeing Merthani bioships, Xerian crystalline vessels, and at least a dozen other species we can't identify. They're positioning themselves between Earth and the Council fleet. The main display screen lit up with incoming communication requests from the arriving ships. Admiral Keth Ara of the Merthani was the first to speak, her whale song voice carrying clearly through the translation system. People of Earth, you gave us the gift of freedom when we had forgotten such a thing was possible. Now we return that gift. The Merthani fleet stands with humanity. More voices joined in as other species announced their arrival. The Xerian collective spoke with one mind through their silicon-based hive network. The crystal ships of Xerian remember their debt. We fight for the humans who broke our chains. Captain Thelvara of the Vegan Confederacy added her biomechanical vessels to the growing alliance. The plant children of Vega bring life to this battle. We will show the Council what grows from the seeds of rebellion. Admiral Hayes watched in wonder as hundreds of rebel ships took up defensive positions around Earth. Species that had never worked together before were coordinating their movements with surprising efficiency. The humans had given them FTL technology, but they had brought their own innovations to the fight. High Arbiter Veltar aboard the Council flagship watched the same display with growing fury. His perfect plan to make an example of humanity had turned into a disaster. Instead of crushing a single rebellious species, he now faced a coalition of rebels that outnumbered his own forces. How did they coordinate this? He demanded of his intelligence officers. Sub-Commander Kethvar gestured helplessly at the tactical display. The humans have been using their small ship to carry messages between rebel groups. They've created an alliance network that spans the entire galaxy. Veltar realized with cold certainty that the Council had made a critical error. By focusing all their attention on Earth, they had given the rebels time to organize and plan. The siege that was supposed to demonstrate Council power had instead become a symbol of their weakness. Open communications to all rebel vessels, Veltar ordered. Perhaps we can still negotiate a solution to this crisis. But the response that came back was not from any of the alien species that had arrived to defend Earth. Instead, it was Captain Ryan Clark speaking from the bridge of the Pioneer as his small ship took position at the center of the Allied fleet. Hi, Arbiter. This is Captain Clark of the human vessel Pioneer. I speak for the Free Species Alliance, representing over 400 worlds that have declared independence from Council rule. We have one simple message for you. The age of Council tyranny is over. The words hung in space between the two fleets like a declaration of war. Veltar felt something he had not experienced in centuries of rule. Genuine fear. Not fear of death or defeat in battle, but fear of irrelevance. The galaxy he had helped shape and control was changing in ways he could not stop or understand. You cannot win, Veltar transmitted back. We have ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. Our technology is superior. Our experience in warfare unmatched. You are children playing with forces beyond your comprehension. Catherine Adams, monitoring the communication from Earth, felt compelled to respond. Her voice carried clearly to both fleets as she spoke from the command center. You're right that we're young compared to the Council, but that's exactly why we'll win. You've become so focused on maintaining control that you've forgotten how to adapt and grow. We haven't. As if to prove her point, the rebel fleet began to move in ways that defied Council understanding of space combat. The Merthani bioships flowed like water around the rigid Council formations. Xerion crystal vessels created geometric patterns that focused energy in impossible ways. Plant ships from Vega grew new weapons and shields in real time as the battle developed. But it was the human ships that surprised everyone the most. Earth's small defense fleet had been equipped with modified FTL drives that allowed them to make micro-jumps during combat. They would appear behind Council lines, fire a devastating volley, then vanish before the enemy could respond. It was a tactic that no species had ever used before, because no one had thought to weaponize FTL technology in such a way. The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment when the old galaxy died and a new one was born. The Council's superior firepower and advanced shields meant nothing against enemies who could be anywhere at any time. Their rigid military formations crumbled under assault from creatures that thought and fought in completely alien ways. When the last Council ship retreated toward the galactic core, carrying news of their defeat to the remaining strongholds, the celebration that erupted across the Allied fleet could be heard on every communication channel. Hundreds of species, speaking in thousands of languages, united in their joy at finally being free. Admiral Hayes looked around the command center at the faces of her staff and realized that humanity had accomplished something even more important than winning a battle. They had proven that cooperation was stronger than control, that diversity was more powerful than uniformity, and that the dream of freedom was worth any sacrifice. The Council still held large portions of the galaxy, and the war was far from over. But the alliance that had formed around Earth would carry the fight to every corner of known space, bringing hope to species that had never dared to dream of liberty. The revolution had begun in a small laboratory in Nevada, but it would end among the stars. Supreme Council leader Zarthek emerged from his regeneration chamber aboard the massive fortress ship Eternal Dominion with murder in his ancient eyes. The crystalline being was old even by Council standards, having lived for over 1,000 years and personally overseen the conquest of 47 different species. He had been awakened from his century-long sleep by news that should have been impossible. The galactic order he had helped create was collapsing. The command chamber of the Eternal Dominion was larger than most cities, filled with tactical displays that showed the current state of the rebellion. Red zones marked areas where Council control had been completely lost. Yellow indicated systems where fighting was still ongoing. Green showed the remaining strongholds where Council authority remained absolute. Zarthek was horrified to see that red now covered almost half the galaxy. "Explain this disaster," he commanded, his voice resonating through the chamber like breaking glass. Fleet Admiral Korvash, a massive reptilian being with scars from a dozen different wars, gestured at the tactical display with barely controlled binge. The humans developed independent FTL technology and shared it with every species in the galaxy. Over 600 worlds have declared independence. Our enforcement fleets are stretched beyond their limits. Zarthek studied the display for long minutes, his crystalline form shifting through different colors as he processed the magnitude of the crisis. The Council had ruled through a simple principle: control the means of transportation, and you control everything else. Species could rebel all they wanted, but without the ability to travel between stars, they were trapped in their home systems where they could be easily crushed. But now that fundamental advantage was gone. Worse, the rebels had proven that Council technology was not as advanced as everyone had believed. For 10,000 years, the Council had claimed that their FTL gates represented the pinnacle of scientific achievement. The humans had shattered that lie with a discovery made in a simple laboratory. "What of Veltar's fleet?" Zarthek asked. "Destroyed or scattered," Korvash replied grimly. "Only 300 ships escaped the battle at Earth. The humans and their allies now control that entire sector." Zarthek felt something he had not experienced in centuries: doubt. The Council had always won their wars through superior technology and overwhelming force, but this conflict was different. How could you defeat an enemy that could simply vanish into unexplored space whenever threatened? "Assemble the Deep Fleet," he ordered finally. "It is time to remind the galaxy why the Council has ruled for 10,000 years. The Deep Fleet was the Council's ultimate weapon, a collection of ancient warships that had been built at the height of their technological power. Most species in the galaxy had never seen these vessels, because they were only deployed when the Council faced an existential threat. Each ship was over 10 kilometers long and carried weapons that could destroy entire star systems. but mobilizing the deep fleet would take time, and the rebellion was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. Even as Zarthek issued his orders, new reports arrived of Council defeats across the galaxy. On Earth, Captain Ryan Clark stood in the renovated command center that had become the unofficial headquarters of the Free Species Alliance. The past month had been a whirlwind of activity as representatives from dozens of species worked together to coordinate their rebellion against the Council. The diversity in the room was staggering. Crystalline beings from the Xerion Collective stood beside aquatic Murthani in mobile water tanks, while plant-like vegans communicated through chemical signals that required special translation equipment. The situation in the Centauri sector is stabilizing, reported Ambassador Thelkara, a graceful being whose species had been freed from Council mining operations just weeks earlier. Our combined fleets have secured 17 star systems and established refugee processing centers for species fleeing Council retaliation. Dr. Catherine Adams looked up from her latest research, her face showing both excitement and concern. The technical data sharing is proceeding ahead of schedule. Over 200 species have now developed their own variations of FTL technology. But we're also seeing some concerning developments. What kind of developments? Asked Admiral Hayes. Some species are using the technology for internal conflicts instead of fighting the Council. The Draconian Empire has split into 3 factions that are now at war with each other. The Altarian Federation is using their new ships to settle old territorial disputes with their neighbors. Ryan felt a chill of worry. The alliance had formed quickly in the face of a common enemy, but it was held together more by shared hatred of the Council than genuine cooperation. If species started fighting each other instead of their former oppressors, the rebellion could tear itself apart. We need to establish some kind of governing structure, suggested Admiral Kethara, whose Murthani bioships had become the backbone of the Alliance's mobile forces. Rules of engagement, protocols for territorial disputes, guidelines for technology, sharing. The debate that followed revealed the fundamental challenge facing the Alliance. Every species had different values, different social structures, different ideas about how a free galaxy should be organized. The humans favored democratic principles, but the hive-minded Xerion Collective couldn't understand individual voting. The Murthani believed in consensus through song, while the plant-like vegans made decisions through chemical communication that could take days to complete. Their discussion was interrupted by urgent alerts from the long-range sensor networks. Commander Jake Sullivan's face was pale as he made his report. We're detecting massive energy signatures near the galactic core. Something big is moving toward our position. The main display shifted to show sensor readings from the deep space, monitoring stations that the Alliance had established in captured Council territory. What they saw made everyone in the room fall silent. Hundreds of enormous vessels were emerging from hidden facilities near the galactic center, ships unlike anything in the Council's known fleet. Dr. Lisa Parker, who had become the Alliance's expert on Council technology, studied the sensor data with growing alarm. These ships are ancient. The energy signatures suggest technology that's thousands of years more advanced than anything we've seen before. I think the Council has been holding back their most powerful weapons. The realization hit everyone at the same time. The Council hadn't been fighting at full strength. The fleets that had been defeated at Earth and dozens of other systems were just the regular enforcement forces. Now they were bringing out weapons that had been kept in reserve for the greatest emergencies. How long until they reach our forward positions? Ryan asked. Based on their current speed, approximately 2 weeks. Sullivan replied. But sir, if they have more advanced FTL technology than we do, they could arrive much sooner. Admiral Hayes began issuing orders to recall the scattered Alliance fleets and prepare defensive positions, but everyone knew that conventional tactics would be useless against ships that powerful. The Alliance had succeeded so far because their enemies had underestimated them, but the Deep Fleet would not make that mistake. As reports continued to pour in about the approaching Council superfleet, a new voice joined the discussion. President. Susan Grant had been in emergency sessions with the leaders of Earth's major nations, and her expression showed the weight of terrible decisions. "I've just received a communication from Supreme Council leader Zarthek," she announced. "He's offering terms for surrender. If we stop sharing FTL technology and return to our assigned territory, he promises that humanity will be spared." The room erupted in angry voices as species after species rejected the idea of abandoning the rebellion. But Ryan could see the logic behind the Council's offer. Earth was the source of the technology that had made the rebellion possible. If they could convince humanity to withdraw from the alliance, the other species might lose hope and surrender. "What about the rest of us?" demanded Ambassador Thelkara. "If the humans accept this offer, what happens to the species that have already declared independence?" President Grant's silence was answer enough. The Council's offer applied only to humanity. Every other species that had joined the rebellion would face extinction if Earth withdrew from the alliance. Ryan looked around the room at the faces of beings from dozens of different worlds, species that had risked everything for the chance at freedom. The choice facing humanity was simple but terrible: save themselves by abandoning their allies, or stand together and face annihilation by the most powerful fleet in galactic history. The decision would determine not just the fate of the rebellion, but the kind of species humanity would become among the stars. President Susan Grant stood before the combined assembly of the Free Species Alliance, knowing that her next words would echo through history. Representatives from over 300 worlds filled the great chamber that had once been a council, administrative center, now converted into the heart of the rebellion's government. The diversity was breathtaking: beings of crystal and flesh, energy and metal, all united by their shared dream of freedom. "The Council's offer has been considered and rejected," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "Humanity will not abandon our allies for the promise of safety. We stand together, or we fall together." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Cheers, songs, chemical signals, and harmonic vibrations filled the chamber as hundreds of species expressed their gratitude and determination. But beneath the celebration, everyone understood the reality they faced. The Deep Fleet was less than a week away, and nothing in the Alliance's arsenal could match its ancient power. Captain Ryan Clark watched the proceedings from the military observation deck, his mind focused on the impossible task ahead: intelligence. Reports from scout ships that had observed the Deep Fleet painted a terrifying picture. The Council's ancient warships were not just larger than anything the Alliance possessed, they seemed to operate on completely different principles of physics. Their weapons could reach across entire star systems, and their shields appeared to be impenetrable. Dr. Catherine Adams joined him at the observation window, her face showing the exhaustion of weeks spent trying to find a technological solution to their predicament. "I've been analyzing the sensor data from the Deep Fleet," she said quietly. "Their ships are using some kind of dimensional manipulation technology. They're not just traveling through space. They're moving through higher dimensions we can't even detect." "Can we counter it?" Ryan asked. Catherine shook her head. "Not with our current understanding of physics. They've had 10,000 years to develop this technology. We've had less than a year." Down in the main chamber, Admiral Kethara of the Merthani was addressing the assembly. Her whale song voice carried harmonics of ancient wisdom as she spoke about the nature of sacrifice and the price of freedom. "The deep swimmers of my people know that some currents cannot be fought, only endured. But even the strongest current eventually finds its way to the sea." Her words seemed to spark something in the gathering. One by one, representatives began to speak about their own species' contributions to the final battle. The Xerion Collective offered to link their hive mind with the Alliance's tactical networks, creating a coordination system faster than any individual commander. The Vegan Confederacy promised to grow new bioships in real time during the battle, creating fresh reinforcements from captured space debris. but it was a small, previously unknown species called the Quantum Touched that offered the most intriguing possibility. Their representative, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, spoke in mathematical equations that required advanced computers to translate. Our species exists partially outside normal space-time. The translation, system rendered. We have observed the Council's deep fleet across multiple dimensional layers. Their power source is singular and centralized. Disable it, and all ships become vulnerable. Dr. Lisa Parker, who had become the Alliance's expert on exotic technologies, leaned forward with sudden interest. What kind of power source? A controlled black hole at the fleet's center, came the response. It provides energy through dimensional tapping to all vessels simultaneously. But it also creates a weakness. Disrupt the dimensional field, and the entire fleet loses power. Admiral Hayes, monitoring the discussion from Earth's command center, felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. Can we disrupt this field? The Quantum Touched being pulsed with uncertain colors. Possible, but requires precise coordination across multiple dimensions, and something must reach the fleet's center undetected. Ryan felt pieces of a desperate plan beginning to form in his mind. The Pioneer was still the smallest and most maneuverable ship in the Alliance fleet. Its experimental drive systems had been upgraded dozens of times with technology from various species. If any ship could slip through the deep fleet's defenses, it would be his. I need to speak with the engineering teams from all species, he announced. If we're going to try this, we'll need every technological advantage we can get. Over the next 48 hours, the most brilliant minds from hundreds of worlds worked together to modify the Pioneer for its suicidal mission. Marathani bioengineers grew living armor that could adapt to different types of weapons fire. Xerion crystal shapers created a hull coating that would bend light and sensor beams around the ship. Vegan plant masters installed self-repairing systems that could regrow damaged components in minutes. But the most important addition came from humanity itself. Catherine Adams had developed a new variation of the FTL drive that could function in higher dimensions using principles learned from studying the Council's own technology. It was untested and dangerous, but it might allow the Pioneer to navigate the dimensional layers where the deep fleet operated. As the modifications neared completion, reports arrived that changed everything. The deep fleet had accelerated beyond all predictions and would arrive in the Centauri sector within hours, not days. There was no time for proper testing or preparation. The Alliance fleet would have to make their stand with whatever forces they could assemble. Commander Jake Sullivan coordinated the defense from the Alliance's mobile command ship, watching as hundreds of vessels took up positions around the key, systems that formed the rebellion's heartland. The numbers were impressive, over 2,000 ships from dozens of species, each bringing their own unique capabilities to the fight. But against the 30 massive vessels of the Deep Fleet, they seemed pitifully inadequate. The Council ships arrived exactly as predicted, emerging from higher dimensional space like nightmares made real. Each vessel was a work of art and terror, their hulls flowing with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. They moved with deliberate precision, positioning themselves to demonstrate their overwhelming superiority. Supreme Council Leader Zarthek's voice echoed across all communication frequencies as he delivered his final ultimatum. Rebellious children of the galaxy, behold the true power of the Council. We have tolerated your defiance long enough. Surrender now, and some of you may be permitted to live as examples to future generations. The response came not from any single leader, but from the combined voices of the entire Alliance. Hundreds of species, speaking in their own languages and ways, delivered the same message. We choose freedom. The battle that followed redefined warfare on a galactic scale. The Deep Fleet's weapons reached across vast distances, turning entire asteroids into plasma and creating temporary black holes that swallowed Alliance ships whole. But the rebels fought with desperate creativity, using tactics that the ancient Council vessels couldn't predict or counter. Mirthani bioships flowed, like liquid around the massive Council vessels, striking at weak points with precision born of desperation. Xerion crystal formations focused their combined firepower into beams that could penetrate even the Deep Fleet's dimensional shields. Vegan plant ships grew like cancer across enemy hulls, their living weapons adapting to each new defense they encountered. In the midst of the chaos, the Pioneer began its impossible journey toward the fleet's center. Ryan and his crew navigated through dimensions that human senses weren't designed to perceive, following the energy signatures of the controlled black hole that powered their enemies. The modified ship phased in and out of normal space like a ghost, avoiding detection through pure luck and the sacrifices of Alliance ships that drew enemy fire. Dr. Catherine Adams monitored their progress from the engineering station, her instruments barely able to track their movement through higher dimensions. "We're approaching the power source," she announced. "But the dimensional distortion is increasing. I don't know if the ship can maintain coherence much longer." Through the view screen, they could see their destination, a massive sphere of twisted space-time that contained a black hole barely the size of a marble but massing more than a star. Energy flowed from it in streams of pure mathematics, feeding the weapons and shields of the entire Deep Fleet. "How do we disrupt something like that?" asked Lieutenant Danny Foster, his young face pale with the strain of navigating impossible space. Catherine smiled grimly as she prepared the final modification to their FTL drive. "We don't disrupt it. We feed it something it can't digest." The Pioneer's experimental drive core had been modified with quantum resonance technology from a dozen different species. Instead of simply bending space around the ship, it would create a feedback loop in the dimensional field that powered the Council fleet. The effect would be catastrophic for everyone involved, including the Pioneer itself. "All crew to emergency stations," Ryan announced. "This is going to be rough." As the Pioneer dove toward the controlled black hole at the heart of the Deep Fleet, Catherine activated the quantum resonance device. Reality twisted and screamed around them as two incompatible technologies tried to occupy the same dimensional space. 5 years had passed since the final battle against the Deep Fleet, and the galaxy had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. Dr. Catherine Adams stood on the observation deck of the New Horizons research station, watching ships from hundreds of different species arrive and depart through what had once been restricted Council space. The diversity was staggering. Crystalline vessels that sang as they moved, bioships that grew new sections during flight, and mechanical craft that seemed to rebuild themselves with each journey. The space station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Built by the combined efforts of dozens of species, it represented everything the galaxy could accomplish when beings worked together instead of under the iron rule of a single authority. Mirthani bioarchitects had grown the living, sections that adapted to different environmental needs. Xerion crystal shapers had created the geometric frameworks that focused energy throughout the structure. Human engineers had designed the modular systems that allowed constant expansion and modification. "The quarterly trade report is ready for your review," announced Dr. Alan Brooks, Catherine's research partner and one of the key architects of the new galactic economy. "Commerce between Alliance worlds has increased by 400% since we eliminated the Council's gate fees and transportation monopoly." Catherine nodded, but her attention was focused on a small ship approaching the station's docking bay. She recognized the design as a memorial vessel, one of the new class of ships dedicated to exploring the unknown regions where the Pioneer had vanished 5 years ago. The search for Captain Ryan Clark and his crew had become more than just a rescue mission. It had evolved into a symbol of the Alliance's commitment to leaving no one behind. The ship's pilot was Commander Sarah Williams, who had taken over many of Ryan's duties after his disappearance. She had spent the past 2 years mapping the dimensional anomalies created by the quantum resonance device that had defeated the Deep Fleet. Her reports always carried the same disappointing news. No sign of the Pioneer or its crew. Any luck?
This time?
Catherine asked as Sarah joined her on the observation deck. Sarah shook her head, but her expression wasn't entirely defeated. No trace of the Pioneer, but we found something else. There's a region near the old Council Core worlds, where space itself seems to be healing. The dimensional damage from the final battle is repairing itself, and it's creating some interesting effects. What kind of effects? New forms of space-time that we've never seen before. Areas where the laws of physics work differently. Some of our scientists think it might be possible to develop entirely new types of FTL technology based on these phenomena. Catherine felt a familiar excitement at the prospect of new discoveries. The past 5 years had been a golden age of scientific advancement, as species that had been kept separate by council restrictions finally began sharing their knowledge freely. Technologies that would have taken centuries to develop in isolation were being perfected in months through cooperative research. But not everything in the new galaxy was peaceful. The fall of the Council had created power vacuums that some species had tried to fill through force. The Draconian Empire had attempted to establish its own version of galactic rule, only to face immediate rebellion from worlds that had just won their freedom. Several other species had declared themselves the rightful heirs to Council authority, leading to conflicts that the Alliance was still working to resolve. President Susan Grant, now serving her second term as the elected leader of the Galactic Free Trade Association, had spent much of her time mediating disputes between former Council subjects. The challenge wasn't just political, it was philosophical. How could beings with completely different values and social structures work together without someone imposing their will on everyone else? The answer had come gradually through trial and error. The Alliance had evolved into a loose confederation, where each species maintained sovereignty over their own territory while cooperating on matters of trade, exploration, and mutual defense. It wasn't perfect, but it was infinitely better than the rigid hierarchy that had dominated the galaxy. For 10,000 years, Admiral Patricia Hayes, now retired from active military service, had become the Alliance's chief historian. Her project to document the rebellion and its aftermath had revealed fascinating patterns in how different species had adapted to freedom. Some, like the Merthani, had immediately set out to explore regions of space they had never been allowed to visit. Others, like the Xerion Collective, had focused on developing new technologies that would prevent any future attempts at galactic domination. But perhaps the most interesting development had been the emergence of mixed crews and colonies, ships where humans worked alongside crystalline beings and plant-based life forms, worlds where different species had chosen to live together, sharing their unique perspectives and capabilities. The Council had always preached that different species were incompatible and needed strong central authority to prevent conflict. The Alliance was proving that cooperation was not only possible, but beneficial for everyone involved. Dr. Lisa Parker had established the Institute for Dimensional Studies on a world near the galactic rim, far from the chaos of the core systems. Her team included researchers from 30 different species, all working together to understand the fundamental forces that governed reality. Their discoveries had already led to breakthroughs in faster-than-light travel, energy generation, and even biological enhancement. We're seeing evidence that consciousness itself might be a fundamental force of nature, Lisa explained during a research conference attended by scientists from across the Alliance. The quantum resonance device that destroyed the Deep Fleet didn't just disrupt their technology, it created new forms of space-time that respond to thought and intention. The implications were staggering. If consciousness could directly influence reality at the quantum level, it might explain how so many different species had been able to develop their own variations of FTL technology. It also suggested possibilities for future development that went far beyond anything the Council had achieved. But not everyone was focused on the future. The Council remnants, driven to the edge of the galaxy, continued to plot their return to power. Intelligence reports suggested they were developing new weapons, and trying to recruit species that felt left out of the Alliance's prosperity. Supreme Council leader Zarthek, now calling himself the true emperor of the galaxy, had established a stronghold in the void between galaxies and was reportedly building a fleet designed specifically to counter Alliance technology. Admiral Jake Sullivan, who had taken over Hayes' role as military coordinator, monitored these threats with growing concern. "They're not just building ships," he reported to the Alliance Council. "They're trying to convince isolated species that the Alliance is just another form of oppression. Some worlds are starting to listen." The challenge was real, but not insurmountable. The Alliance had advantages that the Council had never possessed. Genuine cooperation between species, technological innovation driven by freedom rather than control, and the moral authority that came from liberating the oppressed rather than enslaving them. But they couldn't take their success for granted. Catherine found herself thinking about Ryan Clark and his crew more often as the anniversary of their disappearance approached. They had sacrificed everything to ensure that the galaxy would be free to determine its own destiny. The least the Alliance could do was make sure their sacrifice wasn't wasted. The memorial service held on the 5th anniversary of the final battle was attended by representatives from over 500 worlds. President Grant delivered the main address from the same chamber where the Alliance had been formed, her words carried across the galaxy by communication networks that the Council had once monopolized. "We gather not just to remember the heroes who gave their lives for our freedom," she said, "but to recommit ourselves to the principles they died defending. The galaxy belongs to all of us, not to any single species or ideology. Our differences make us stronger, not weaker. And our future will be determined not by the powerful few, but by the choices we make together." As the ceremony concluded, Catherine received a message that made her heart skip a beat. Commander Williams had detected something unusual in the dimensional anomaly field, a faint energy signature that matched the Pioneer's quantum resonance device. It might be nothing, or it might be the first sign that Ryan and his crew were still alive somewhere in the twisted space-time they had created. The search would continue, as would the work of building a better galaxy. The Council's age of tyranny was over, replaced by something humanity had given to the stars: the radical idea that all beings deserved the chance to determine their own destiny. In the end, that might be humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. Not faster-than-light technology or military prowess, but the simple belief that freedom was worth any sacrifice and that cooperation was stronger than control. It was a lesson written in starlight across a galaxy finally free to write its own story. The age of the Free Species Alliance had begun, and among the infinite stars anything was possible.